G'day. Welcome to my talk today, Papercuts, Stop the Bleed. Hopefully everyone can understand me through my Australian accent. I will try not to let my accent get too broad through this talk. My name is Kristine Sihto. I am based in Brisbane, Australia. I consult for a boutique information security company called Tinker Inc. as an editor, technical writer, documentation specialist, and cybersecurity awareness trainer. My role is to work mainly with cybersecurity consultancies, stepping in and reviewing their client offerings and databases to ensure that content is written to the appropriate level. Outside of my general 9 to 5, I am an artist, poet, and all-around creative type. Find me on Mastodon and those two other spots if you're interested. As everyone in the Write the Docs community should already understand, we can't work without documentation. It's the primary means of business communication in the 21st century, especially now that remote and hybrid work models have become so necessary. And by documentation, I'm not just talking about words on a page or even on a screen. Documentation includes anything auditable, like video feed, sound recordings, photographs. Today I want to talk to you about your documentation. We all have it. We all need it. Some of us need more of it. But a lot of companies are bleeding information in places that they don't even realize it can leak from. I intend to show you some of those places and give you a few strategies that you can use to reduce the loss of sensitive information. Information leakage is a serious issue both externally and internally. Externally through statements of work, reporting, training material, emails, screenshots. It could be just the name of another client. It could be data. It could be that you're telling others the names or habits of your employees, your internal processes. Internally, you might be releasing private employee information through surprise birthday announcements or internal newsletter employee spotlights. So let's look at the heavy hitters that will give you the most grief. I'm going to jump right in on my first subject by telling you about my first day. It doesn't matter where. This is a general first day, and this has happened at almost every workplace I've ever edited for. On my first day, I am presented with a document, usually something being presented to a client later that week, and I'm asked, tell us what you think. So I open up this pretty, gleaming, fresh report, all shiny and ready to go to the client. And I get about 2 pages in, and I say just generally to the entire open plan office, because I don't really know who's who yet. What's Jack's dry cleaning, and what has it got to do with Annie's cupcake factory? And unerringly I will hear a response. It generally falls into one of 3 categories. Number 1, a loud oops, followed by an uncomfortable laugh. Number 2, a soft, I thought I fixed that. Or number 3, a very sharp, sudden expletive. Jack's Dry Cleaning in this case is the name of the original client this report went to, who is not the client it's supposed to be going to, because this company is doing the exact same thing that every other company on earth does. They decided to template the original without sanitizing it first. That's bad. Because the document I'm holding has been, or should have been, through the hands of at least 2 other people before I ever laid hands on it. It's expensive to write completely bespoke documentation every time. So collectively, we reuse content. This is great. It saves a lot of time and the cost of those staffing hours. So it makes sense to reuse content, and I thoroughly encourage it wherever I go. I believe you should never write twice what you only need to write once. But here's the rub. You can't just copy-paste over all of that old stuff. All you little startups, I'm looking at you, spend the unbillable hours sanitizing your templates. Why? Because you miss things. I miss things. It doesn't matter how good you are, how good your QA process is. If you are not working from a sanitized template, you can't be certain that you're not going to corrupt your data with that from the previous report. This raises the question of how to sanitize your document thoroughly. We should all be familiar with sanitizing our hands right now, cleaning all the unnecessary gunk off. Well, it's the same with documents. Have a process in between creating your initial document and your second document where one employee, preferably not the employee who wrote the initial document, manually replaces all instances of non-transferable information with dummy text. Use a signifier at the start and end of each of those sections. Square brackets, percentage marks, ampersands, it doesn't matter. So that the next person can easily recognize these sections in the template. Repeatable information such as the client name can be automated by using a metadata field for this purpose. If you're working in Word, which a lot of organizations do, saving your templates as .x rather than docx means that it will force you to create a new document when saving, which is very handy for enforcing sanitized content each use. Be careful with this though, as not all document repositories enforce this. I'm looking specifically at SharePoint, but I know that there are others. I am adamant that employees should be writing as little as possible so that they have more time for actual work. So yes, if you have a new type of report, template it for your next use and every other use in the future, but sanitize it thoroughly. While we're talking about Word, I want to mention screenshots. Word has a cropping mechanism for images. People are inherently lazy. This is a good thing. It's the foundation of all labor saving, but sometimes it's going to wind you up in hot water. If you take a screenshot and just put the entire thing into Word, you can crop it so that it looks exactly like you want it to look on the page. Great. Unfortunately, when you crop in Word, it doesn't actually crop the image. It just hides it. Now, I tried to get a video to work here, but there were issues, so instead you get a number of still lifes. Sorry. On the screen right now is a screenshot that I took on my desktop, and this is it sitting in Word. I've saved the file, then reopened it later. So, hiding parts of something is not the same as getting rid of them. If that screenshot has got other things in the background, there is a strong chance that you are exposing those other things. Maybe emails, maybe sensitive processes happening in the background for other clients. Maybe your employee has been looking at not very sanitary content online. Do you actually know what you are showing in the screenshot that you are providing to other people? Going back into a Word file, I can step back into the crop tool to reveal the rest of the image and continue to manipulate it. For big images, the edges of the image may even be overrunning the page boundaries, so I can move the image around until I get this. Oh look, I play Minecraft. Not the most stunning revelation, but it could have been much worse. This was all uncovered simply by shifting the image displayed within the cropped section. When inserting images into a document, the image itself should be only showing the information that you intend to show to your audience. This means cropping the image and saving it as a cropped image before inserting it into your document. This has a knock-on benefit of also reducing the size of the document after you have saved it. After all, you don't have to keep all of those lovely hidden pixels. You can just discard them. This is hard to enforce, but with clear procedures that include image quality expectations, most employees will do it the way they're meant to. In fact, if you tell them in the procedures that Windows has a built-in snip tool they can use, and then give them the hotkey combination, which is, which is Shift plus Windows key plus S, they may become your friend for life. And of course, you should have a quality assurance process you go through before documents are released, which will hopefully catch any strays. The last part of this process is to always PDF your documents before releasing to the outside world, so that if anything slips through the cracks, the PDF process removes any of the extra bits. Now let's take a look at a section of your document you've probably looked at but not paid much attention to. If I just move across to the information page, you will see all this lovely information here. It talks about the person that's last edited it. It talks about the time that it's been edited. What other information does it give? There are a number of other fields available in here. And all of these reveal various different aspects of the metadata of your document. Now, what is metadata? It is quite literally data about data. And what you can do with this particular data is look at who owned it previously. Look at who has edited it or created it. The names of internal managers, the names of other employees. Let me tell you a story based on a real event. I've changed the names to protect all involved parties. Once upon a time, I was working with a document and I opened up the information page. This particular document was the basis for hundreds of documents throughout a company. Opening up the information page, I found that the owner of the document was a rival company. Not only that, the name of the original author was an expletive. It wasn't an accidental expletive. It was quite obviously designed to shock and be insulting to a person with a specific first name. I immediately have a quandary on my hands. This is obvious IP theft, plus there's an issue with the author's name. This document was so prevalent throughout this organization that it could not be easily replaced. So I did what any other person with no authority does. I escalated that decision and secured my employment for several more months as all of those documents got redesigned and redeployed. There is an incredibly high incidence of IP theft that occurs. In a 2018 report, it was identified that 72% of CEOs admitted to taking IP with them from previous employers. Look, it may save time, but that's a false economy, because if your documents are going out to clients, those clients aren't stupid. They look at these sorts of things. Those clients and customers may have legitimate concerns if they see that your IP looks strangely identical to someone else's or has information pertaining to another company. This is an extreme concern for reputational damage, especially when you factor in the risk of litigation from your competitor org. But that's not all. This example here has been pulled from a license template I recently had the dubious pleasure of working on. Instructions in the template told you how to access this section, alter this section, populate the data automatically throughout the rest of the template. It then told you to delete the instructions page. Who here looks at this and thinks that these should be employee names, especially when they're looking for an information security manager or a service provider? I can guarantee that someone will look at entries like this and fill it in with employee names, not considering how hard it is to go back in and change them every time an employee shifts roles or providers change, even though this should be linking to the role, not the individual. And with this populated with employee names, you have a fabulous list of employee email addresses that can be spoofed in a spear phishing attempt. So, couldn't they just see those names in the document anyway? In this particular template, only one of these fields was used, and that was the organization name. The rest of the fields are just window dressing. Version control. Does your version control look like this? I've seen version control that goes on for literal pages, with every passing of the document displayed for the rest of the world. This can be an issue with older documents where you have patterns emerge. You can see here that you've got a manager who suddenly stops engaging with the document and someone else has taken over. This indicates to me that the manager has left the company, which means that once again you have a phishing inroad that gives the phisher an air of legitimacy. I was dealing with Simone R. directly. You say she's left the organization, but there's a consignment she ordered and payment's very overdue, etc. Do you need to show all of this information to the world? Some people working with classified documents might. You need to have that trail of every set of hands. But for most instances, this isn't data that you need to display. And if nobody is filling out the reason for the change, which, let's face it, nobody does, there's no reason to capture all of these movements. So far, I've talked about the classical idea of a document, but so what? Maybe you're using a kiosk. Perhaps you're a tech company that provides software. Maybe you're providing a way for other people to document their stuff. So here's another story. I got an ultrasound a while back. For about 5 minutes, the ultrasound technician left me alone in the room to change into a gown. The screen on the machine was live, and I was able to see patient details, names, dates of birth, the procedure being performed, at what time, and the diagnosis. I didn't even need to touch the machine. I didn't even need to crane my neck from my position sitting on the examination table. It was all fabulously readable, even for a short-sighted person like me. Where I am in Australia, that's a reportable data breach. If it had happened in the USA, I believe it would have been a HIPAA violation. When I queried the technician, I learnt that the machine was brand new, less than 2 weeks old. It hadn't been set up with an automated screen sleep setting. They didn't even know if it was capable of being put to sleep. They didn't know if they were able to lock the screen. And the takeaway here is hide data. Hide your data. Hide other people's data. It doesn't have to be a fancy solution, just setting a screen to sleep mode after a short period of no interaction is your first point of security. This goes for paper documents too. Manila folders and title pages on reports don't just hold everything together and make them look pretty. They stop casual observers from gathering data without touching anything. According to NIST, the principle of least privilege is the privilege that a security architecture is designed so that each entity is granted the minimum secure system resources and authorizations that the entity needs to perform its function. Basically, don't let anybody do anything or see anything that they don't need to see or do. The principle of least privilege applies to information as well as to processes. Don't show it to someone who doesn't need to know it. The same goes for information collection, by the way. If you don't need it, don't collect it, because if you don't have it in the first place, it can't become exposed. The last thing that I'm going to talk to you about today is your away from office emails. These are important to keep the flow of messages to and inside of your organization. It's really helpful to know that my message hasn't reached the person I'm trying to reach. However, there's a real chance of TMI in these, because I'm away from the office because I'm in sunny Vanuatu. I'll be gone for a whole 6 weeks, back on the 18th of November with a wonderful new tan. How much can we tell about this person from this one message? These details can be used to target the person. An even worse scenario here is telling people that you hot desk on certain dates and work from home on others, which tells the email recipient that there's an environment where the people don't necessarily sit next to each other regularly and might not realize that there's a stranger in their midst. It also gives an attacker a cover story which sounds legitimate to get past reception. So your away from office emails should appear like this. The advantage of this type of nondescript message is that it gives no information about return dates, no personal information about the recipient, and directs the recipient to follow up elsewhere. This talk has only just scratched the surface, but it's given you a starting point. Just to recap, sanitize your documents before using them as templates. Having a template on hand means that staff aren't going to grab a previous client offering to use. Be careful what you are showing in screenshots. Only show what you need to. 3, give your clients PDFs rather than Word documents, because they're less vulnerable to manipulation. Try not to give away too much information in your metadata. Reduce unnecessary information in version control. Hide information from people who don't need to see it. Use that principle of least privilege. And 6, enforce all this stuff through documented processes and extra sets of eyes. Thank you everyone for being here. I hope that you've picked up some new and actionable information. Now it's on to question time. Thank you.
Great talk, really amazing.
Thank you.
I love the call outs to startups. I love the call outs to SharePoint. I loved it. And all right, so diving into some of the questions that we had are, you talked about the image cropping, about how it doesn't actually crop out that information, just makes the visible size smaller. And are those image dangers still found in other document generating software? So think like InDesign, or do you know other instances?
I haven't actually worked with InDesign for about 9 or 10 years, so I don't know. That was my pre-cybersecurity days, and I wouldn't have noticed. But
you didn't have the alert on. I love it.
Anything that you can go back into and move it around a little bit later and find extra stuff on the edges that you might have accidentally cropped out, that's a danger. That's likely to be an issue along the way. I've found that anything that makes anything permanent so that it's not editable afterwards is generally not going to cause that same issue.
So probably, if I'm understanding you correctly, general tip is to, whenever you crop something within a specific software, make sure that it is actually cropped and not able to be moved around or get to the original source. That's genuinely great advice. And then multiple people in the chat mentioned Snagit to crop images. Have you heard of that?
I've never heard of Snagit before, so that's a new one on me, and I'm going to go and take a look at that later.
Let us know what you find, because now I'm so curious, because so many people use it. Yeah, see, Snagit's great, apparently. But that's great. And then going into actual like content, the words on the page, what are your thoughts on generic, names or informations, whether in the text or on screenshots, like John Q, like sample 123 Main Street?
Okay, so anything that both identifies a person and identifies the place that they were in at any one time is problematic from a cybersecurity perspective or from an information security perspective, because that's giving specific information about their location at a specific time. That's not necessarily limited in any way. So when you do something called creating a data mosaic, which is something that that happens like within hackers can pull information from many different sources and put them all together. If you can tie that data in with other things that you think were happening around that person at the time, you can then use that to track the person on an ongoing basis. So that's a real personal issue when you're identifying somebody in an image.
No, absolutely. Do you have any recommendations for if you need sample data? You need a fake address, you need some fake names, any good resources for that?
I don't generally look at resources. Stuff like that comes out of my brain, because that way you're not. I used to look at old telephone directories for last names and.
Oh my gosh, I love
names, but those aren't around anymore. So.
Bring out the big phone book. You have it back in.
I used to have a collection of them at my house, and
I mean, those are retro now. I think I can bet
very retro now. I'm almost 50. It's been my entire life has been just steadily less and less data I can get about people, and likewise more and more data I can get about people. So yes.
Yeah, no, it's just really interesting. So for example, at my company, we use the Google Developer Documentation Style Guide, and they have a list of examples that are pulled from these kind of open sources and networks. So now I'm curious, I'll go in and look into that. And then going back to the out of office emails, clearly a big hit. Love it. Yeah. Would it be safe to have separate out of office responses, maybe one specific to internal senders or external?
Yes. Separate ones for internal and external are recommended, but sometimes you find that the threat is actually inside your own organization. So internal threats they exist, they happen, and we shouldn't ever become complacent about that, because, also like, even if it's not a threat to the company, it may be a threat to the individual, because they might have somebody on the other side of the office that they've never even noticed who becomes a stalker or something like that. So it's wise to be very cautious about what you are sharing in a professional space. Absolutely.
I also think it's like, it wouldn't be out of the realm for like an email aggregator to send the wrong response message to the wrong domain. And it's like, would you risk that, I guess? And the answer, I'm guessing, is no.
Yeah.
And then our next one is, we actually have an opinion, and then want you to comment on this opinion, which is, I feel like public-facing documentation shouldn't have names of the authors. Could you comment on this?
I agree. So
why?
If it's because, well, if it's a document that's like there for marketing or whatever, you don't want to be releasing the names of those people that have been working on your things inside your company. If it is like for a report or something of that nature, you may choose to have that, but if the original author has left the company several years beforehand, you might not want to have them linked back to that particular document because they no longer speak for the company. Some countries, for example, Australia, we have a law. It's part of the Copyright Act, where an author of a manuscript or whatever has the right to be named as the author, unless they've actually given that right away, and that may be something that is in various different countries, not just Australia. But in most instances, if it's not something that you want the original author being seen, don't put it in.
Absolutely. I think documentation is also tricky because there might be multiple hands of people touching it, manipulating it, and doing that. And then final question of the session: how have you communicated with employees to ensure that they know and follow these good information security practices?
So most of the clients that I work with are already in cybersecurity. So
that helps probably.
When all of your people know about cybersecurity, it tends to be a non-issue. But external companies, I generally write very easy to read sort of like, how-tos on how to put together all of this sort of stuff, and then tell them why. Explain the personal risks to them, and explain, how they can make their own lives more secure by following cybersecurity principles in their day-to-day life. Because when they start to take it on in their day-to-day life, it is much less likely that they're going to start spewing your information all over the place because they're already being careful with their own information.
I love that, because it also takes something that, a skill or interest that everyone here joining has. You can create documentation, teach people why. Like, those are a lot of practices we already follow. So it would make sense to kind of...
Cybersecurity affects absolutely everyone in this day and age. So, the more they can understand how to be secure in their own life, the better. Like, give them something to, take away with them and apply to their other circumstances.
I love that. That's the perfect note to end on for this Q&A session. Thank you so much for joining me and chatting about this.
It's been such a pleasure.